We affirm. Contention 1 is setting standards. Davenport 23 explains that the space race of the 60s required a military effort. The race of the day is a soft power endeavor to gather allies and create rules for space. India is pivotal. As Dubey 23 writes, the Artemis Accords aim to establish norms for space governance. China rejected the Accords, forging ahead with the International Lunar Research Station. The report predicted China would overtake the U.S. as the dominant space power within the decade. India has a robust space program, not to mention immense significance in the Indo-Pacific, the biggest prize of the Accords. Signing acts as a signal to other nations to build consensus. Specifically, Titan 21 finds that Artemis agreements with allies increase pressure on the Chinese to join or be left out. India would pressure China the most. Even if agreements fail to force China to join, they challenge the Chinese counter-system. Victory is essential, as Mulder 21 writes, as with the last space race, finishing second means losing. The winner sets the rules. While a U.S. model would mirror the LIO, a Chinese model would include a disregard for democracy, making the world safe for authoritarianism. Zuber 15 confirms that the U.S. must seek space supremacy. Had the Axis of World War II possessed reconnaissance satellites, they would have won. The defense of the free world hangs upon us. Autocracy is an impact filter. As Diamond 19 furthers that famine, genocide, state collapse, civil war, the main threats to security all stem from authoritarianism. From Russia and China to Iran and North Korea, autocrats support terrorism, proliferate WMDs, or threaten neighbors. Contention 2 is to the moon. As Smithsonian 22 writes, humans haven't set foot on the moon in half a century, but Artemis is going to send them back to construct a base on the moon, a jumping off point for in-depth exploration. Unfortunately, ambition exceeds funding. As Kluger 22 finds that NASA requested $3.4 billion to build a lunar module. Congress responded with barely enough for R&D. The 2024 date for getting back on the moon has slipped to sometime this decade. You can either talk or spend. India can kickstart efforts. As Whittington 19 explains, NASA seeks international partners to send astronauts to the moon. The eagerness of India to join Artemis will constitute a powerful argument for NASA to get funding to effect a crewed moon landing sooner rather than later. Smith 21 confirms that India would be an excellent partner in the Accords. As the world's largest democracy with an established space program, India would add legitimacy. European nations wouldn't. The U.S. success will be a function of how broad a coalition it can assemble. The impact is helium-3. As Vidal 22 finds, the return of the moon is motivated by a desire to exploit resources. Of these, helium-3 represents the most ideal fuel. Extraction could facilitate breakthrough technology. Helium-3 is the holy grail. As Whittington 21 confirms that 1.1 million metric tons exist on the moon, 25 would power the U.S. for a year. A rover could scoop up helium-3 for export. Helium-3 would change the world. The great problem civilization faces is clean, affordable, reliable energies that don't harm the environment. Artemis could solve the energy crisis. Action is essential, as Linwell 21 confirms that climate change is our greatest existential threat. Furthering, climate change is expected to cause 250,000 deaths per year from malnutrition, disease, and heat stress. Every fraction of warming we prevent will reduce suffering and death. Contention 3 is the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. The Quad, a strategic partnership between Australia, India, Japan, and the U.S., is eyeing the cosmos. As Mandari 21 writes, for the first time, the Quad has included space within its project to tackle orbital debris. India's innovative approaches may augment efforts. To Artemis, all members of signatories say for India. Without guidance, ad hoc processes may lead to orbital congestion and debris. India would do well to forge a consensus with countries that have private players. Artemis may be just the right format. Ubidai 22 confirms that if India opts to sign Artemis, it will open an important avenue for Quad cooperation. Signing sets a precedent. Silverstein 22 explains the harmonized set of behaviors by all Quad members who set a powerful example. The Accords can serve as a starting point congruent with Quad's base priorities. Coalescing around expectations is the strongest way to advance interest. The Quad is key, as Panda 21 finds the Quad is well positioned to remediate polluted orbits. The removal technology show promise, the breed mistrust hamstrung by political will. New rules, even if only agreed to by the Quad, could set the table for consensus on major space actors like the EU and the Five Eyes. The impact of space exploration, as Luke 21 writes, the accumulation of space junk poses a catastrophic threat to future space exploration due to increased risk of collision and damage to satellites. Most junk is located in low Earth orbit, in which the ISS and NASA's fleet operates. That stunts lateral innovation. As West 20 claims, Mars is an ideal place to test, detect, and lay the groundwork for exploration. The U.S. space program has been a catalyst for innovation, from GPS and medical diagnostics to wireless tech and camera drones. Space exploration required NASA to develop collaborative tools that link scientists around the world. Either we get off the rock or we save Earth in the process. As Hagerty 17 writes, tech progress can lead to a safer, more sustainable world. There are existential risks that we will not overcome without advances in tech. Pandemics, natural engineered, asteroids, a supervolcanic eruption. In the long run, civilization spread beyond Earth, enabled by advances in spaceflight, is likely to endure. Thus, we affirm.
Renegade, contention 1 is diplomacy. India maintaining strategic ambiguity is key to maintain defensive space capabilities and may help turn the U.S., Artemis, and Russia shot blocks in the negotiating table. O'Hare 22. India's position of strategic autonomy and foreign policies reflected in space diplomacy internationally. India has not signed the Artemis Accords. India does cooperate in a range of civil and military activities with the Quad, allowing it to maintain its national security priorities in space. India's commitment must be perceived as credible badge standing and maintaining ambiguity, allowing it to use tests as a tool in its turns or to pursue its national security goals. India's strategic ambiguity might allow it to leverage its position to bring average spacecraft to the negotiating table. Absent mediation, desire for hegemony in space leads to U.S.-China war. Shoot 22. Strategic benefits drive U.S.-China competition for supremacy in space. There are endless resources buried in asteroids such as cobalt, platinum, and titanium. The desire to dominate space for hegemony is established a space competition relationship between the U.S. and China. The outcome leads to a space arms race. Conflict spills over inevitably becomes existential. Hamilton 21. Military conflict is the most significant source of existential risk. Space solving can be a source of destabilization and conflict both in space and on Earth. And space-based weapons have quick access to attack anywhere, leaving few opportunities for early warning, prevention, and retaliation systems to activate in time to be effective. It is also easier to strike without it being clear which actor is responsible, reducing the perceived risk of retaliation, therefore raising the risk of first strike. Contention against blast shell. Link 1 is Pakistan. Status quo Indian military isn't a threat. Pressure 21. India's looking to expand its military capabilities in space. The key focus is surveillance capabilities of sensitive areas. India's space agency's ability to keep up with this demand is an issue. India has a very basic satellite program. Also, in terms of numbers, it has very few satellites. India's space capabilities are still nascent due to budget limitations. Affirming increases in Indian space capabilities. Roger, go on 22. Military security imperatives gain greater prominence in Indian thinking about space utilization, and New Delhi joined the Artemis Accords offers an opportunity to develop norms and standards for interoperability, and New Delhi is likely to press ahead with ambitious space goals in the coming years. India or Pakistan could initiate the first strike. Cross 23. Pakistan's delivery systems and launch sites will be under round-the-clock surveillance. It also gives India's confidence in the first strike and prevents Pakistan from striking back. Pakistan will place the user losing development. Pakistan has never believed in India's nuclear season. India may execute the first strike against Pakistan to break its resolve or diminish its nuclear capability. Specifying 120. Pakistan has raised concerns about the Indo-US relationship in space, and any move by the US to further this object could result in a larger military action on the part of not only Pakistan but China as well. Indo-Pak work is nuclear. Fair 20. India possessing superior conventional forces would overpower Pakistan's equivalent armies, leading Pakistani leaders to order the use of nuclear weapons against India, igniting the regional nuclear war. Such would increase the dust cloud covering much of the earth, decimating global agriculture. Link 2 is China. India joining the Artemis Accords signals U.S. superiority. China will be forced to push back, increasing tensions. 020. International willingness to participate in the Accords reaffirms U.S. dominance in the space geopolitical sphere. This is because the Artemis Accords did not originate in an international forum. Enough acceptance of the U.S. understanding would place the U.S. in a clear position of competitive advantages in the situation. Both Russia and China seek to avoid at all costs. In an effort to reach that dominant position themselves, Russia and China will push back, which will inevitably cause tensions to heighten. China lashes out when it feels threatened, not when it's winning. Back in Brand 21. Numerous scholars have analyzed why Beijing uses force. China attacks not when it feels confident about the future, but when it worries its enemies are closing. The CCP wages war when it perceives an opening window of vulnerability. That escalates in the Philippines. Branch 21. The best target may be Philippines. Beijing might relish the opportunity to reassert its claims to war on other Asian countries about the cost of angering China by ejecting Filipino forces from their isolated defensible South China Sea outposts. Draws in U.S. Zone 20. If there's a maritime clash with Vietnam, Malaysia, or the Philippines, the U.S. will have an excuse to step in. That can trigger a direct military conflict between China and the U.S. That goes nuclear. It's Hallmark 17. Chinese nuclear escalation in the event of a conventional war with the United States is a significant risk. Chinese fears that the U.S. might be attempting conventional counterforce and limited nuclear escalation to gain military advantage just by China's overseas policy. Nuclear war causes extinction. Star 15. Nuclear war to an environment too cool and dark to grow food. The humans advantage forever.
Okay.
Yeah.
So on your point about China, can you direct me to where it mentions India?
Where it mentions India?
Yeah.
Like the first card.
Where?
It's about how just about the Artemis Accords in general. It says that when the U.S. tries to push back on Chinese power, it's
so
similar to your Link 1 almost.
Can you point me to where it mentions India anywhere in this evidence?
Like the evidence is just specifically about the U.S. pushing its interpretation of international law. It's not.
So what does India signing the Artemis Accords have anything to do if the Artemis Accords existing is going to trigger this?
Well, it's not just specifically about the Artemis Accords existing, right? Like the U.S. making the Artemis Accords in general doesn't actually do anything unless it has like a lot of power behind it and stuff. This specific lashout link is because of India joining it.
Where is that warranted at all?
I mean, it's basically just the first card talking about international willingness to participate.
Your first card doesn't mention India.
It's talking about international participation in general, right? Like it's just the United States. It's probably not international willingness or anything like that.
Your own case.
Yeah, also your own case evidence talks against one. It's like the second or third card. All right. I guess I'll take the question. On your C3 and quad, how much is the quad doing? Are they like creating the technology themselves, or are they just like implementing the technology?
So the technology exists both within government agencies of the Quad Nations and private companies, but it's failing because of a lack of trust. Does that mean it's not being implemented? The Quad currently has ad hoc processes because India hasn't signed on the Artemis Accords, and those ad hoc processes are failing. If they sign on to the solution that would monitor the world.
Okay, so quad, they're not technology techniques, like implementing.
They have the tech, but it can't be implemented because of a lack of political will and a lack of trust that only signing Artemis can solve.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. So let's talk about Pakistan.
Yeah.
What type of capabilities would India develop?
Surveillance capabilities probably. Like the type of round-the-clock surveillance that we don't have right now.
Well, so, like, what does that mean? Like, why would they develop satellites? Like, they have satellites now, right?
Well, the warranty is that they don't have like round-the-clock surveillance that takes away specifically Pakistan's extra capabilities.
Okay, why would India signing the Artemis Accords give them those capabilities? Like, what's different about those satellites?
Well, I think it's more not about what's different than satellites, it's like more of like how many satellites they're able to get, as well as it just says that they get interoperability with US satellites as well. And we say US does possess this technology. Okay, and it's not like specifically the most revolutionary technology, it's just the first part of the uniqueness says that they have budget limitations that don't allow them to get it right now.
Sure.
Alright. I guess I'll get a question. On the C1 on setting standards or whatever, which like side is winning right now, do you think in the what's it called? For instance, like
the US is ahead right now, but we say that within a decade China will overtake the US.
Well, I mean like less than just the US, like for instance the Artemis
Accords. Like the US is blocked, if you want to say.
Okay, that's fine.
So on your first contention, what has India done to actually mediate a conflict?
What has India done to mediate a conflict? Well, I mean, first of all, we haven't seen any types of these like space conflicts that India needs to mediate yet.
They've been going to space for decades.
Yeah, the idea is that there haven't been any of these types of space conflicts that India needs to mediate. The idea is that when it does arise, when there's like fights over things like safety zones or like territory in space, India will be there to mediate. Beginning on diplomacy. First, strategic ambiguity inevitably fails. Mohan 17 writes, India moving to a more practical approach to space, including activity on the moon and exploitation of resources, will demand more intensive cooperation with like-minded countries. Breaking is inevitable, better it happens now. Second of all, Indian mediation fails. 5x23 writes, India and China have gone through cycles of conflict in 2022. Chinese perceptions have seen India as ungovernable, divided, and backward. Indian perceptions of China are authoritarian, soulless, and aggressive. The two have no history of cooperation and little understanding at the highest military and political level. Third of all, China's actually fine with the Accords, G20. Although some lambasted the Accords, Chinese legal commentators did embrace this narrative. Brushing aside boilerplate criticisms, experts appear cognizant of parallel objectives as they develop outer space. Reactions encourage optimism. 4. Greater competition is good. It won't be militaristic. Swami 17. The race is no longer about who gets where. This new race is about who can offer cost-effective space tech. It results in generosity and commercial methods. 5. China is inevitably revisionist. It means that we're the only risk of stopping them. Bowman 21 writes, saying one thing and doing the opposite. Beijing and Moscow have a unique proclivity for. China and Russia have sprinted to develop space-based weapons while pushing a ban. A thinly veiled attempt to mask intentions. Beijing and Moscow want the U.S. to trust but never verify. Instead of falling prey, the U.S. must work with allies to improve resilience. Then, on their second contention. On their first argument about India, Pakistan specifically. First, India is already buying aggressive weapons. Fafran on March 1st writes that India signed a contract to acquire 5 squadrons of air defense missiles from Russia to deal with Pakistan. Second of all, Pakistan doesn't care. We have no specific evidence. Kadwai 18 writes, Pakistan will remain unfazed. It has adequate response options that disallow disturbance. Pakistan would not follow India in developing systems. 3. Geopolitical dynamics make defense essential. Chopper 20. Sino-US dynamics will drive major powers to preserve security interests. India needs early warning sats to monitor ICBM launches. The time to invest is now. Of course, the uniqueness is on the app side. There is an incredibly high risk of war in the status quo. Nakadapaya writes 2 days ago, U.S. intel report raised concerns conflict between India and Pakistan due to an escalatory cycle. Each side's perception raises the risk of conflict with Kashmir or militant attack being potential flashpoints. 5th, U.S. mediation solves the Artemis are a unique vessel. House 20 writes, the U.S. will be a peacekeeper. A history of secrecy has kept these efforts from being effective. The Accords could dampen the disconnect as signatories share info about missions to maintain good relations. 6, the focus is on defensive tech, which means that they won't retaliate. Sun 23. In the current geopolitical climate, governments are more aware of the importance of protecting space assets and national defense strategies. The aim is to advance India's progress and make it a leader in the field of space. Situational awareness is a critical component of modern defense systems. 7, there is no impact war or miscalc. Their evidence is intellectual chutzpah. Pakistan 19. The reality is Pakistan is a professional, streamlined command structure. Despite threats, professionals are realists. India's doctrine is restraint, not first use. Those responsible issue rhetoric. Be skeptical of uniquely likely things. They date back forever and never mean likely, just more likely. Writers constantly adopt today's-to-day attitudes. Articles are published every year saying yes, or the document includes one from each of the last 10. The Accords clearly aren't going to push us past the brink. Even then, their link is incredibly speculative. The Shah evidence relies on India launching a first strike and relies on them acquiring weapons. It says nothing about Pakistan's reaction. It relies on India doing something first, so do not spin it as such. And there is zero probability of India necessarily acquiring these weapons. The Artemis Accords grant them tech, but these are things like satellites, not advanced weaponry that can then be used to attack Pakistan. On their second argument about China. First, proving revisionism non-unique to their argument. As Schumann 23 writes, the more threatening Beijing has become, the warmer India and U.S. relations have grown towards each other. Second of all, there's no war. China has no incentive to escalate. Young 20, Beijing's security priorities lie in the Western Pacific. South Asia is not China's primary theater. China would prefer to save on India. I'll cut the card there. 2, deterrence solved, endo-escalation. As Richard 15 writes, the strategy of both is to maintain the balance of power. Conflict appears improbable because it could spiral and upset development. China's vulnerability is to bet India's with Pakistan, which makes cost of conflict extremely high for both nations. Modernization creates stronger independence, suggesting security dilemma will lead to stability. And their Branson Beckley evidence is fake. Moscow 22. Branson Beckley argued it is now or never if China wants to redraw the world map, but any decline is likely to be gradual and eased by R&D. Current defense spending trajectory suggests Beijing will become more capable of projecting power. Chinese leaders have time. And nowhere in their subpoint B does it even mention India. It literally just says the Accords are bad, which means their argument should have happened already. And if it hasn't, it should disprove the fact they would invade the Philippines. Also, there is no reason the U.S. would get involved. The Telemaj evidence does not say we have direct commitments with the Philippines, but rather countries like Taiwan, which is why the risk of nuclear escalation is incredibly small. And even if the U.S. did have commitments, any involvement would hurt the U.S., and so we wouldn't get involved, especially given that we are bogged down in Ukraine, so there is zero risk of escalation. It would be a small conflict.
On strategic ambiguity, y'all can see that India mediation fails. That takes it all their term. On the revisionism argument, they didn't read any evidence that actually says it's revisionist. They just said that China and Russia say one thing and do the other. Per our evidence, which is a historical analysis of Chinese practice, it says that they never escalate unless they're threatened by the United States. On our C2. First, on impact, first they say that group all the trust say they're buying BMD technology. This isn't our argument. Our argument's about surveillance. Then, they say that Pakistan doesn't care, but this is about BMDs. Obviously, they don't care about BMDs, but surveillance takes out their capabilities to nuke, which they've conceded that like in case. Then they say the uniqueness flips Aff, but all can see the House evidence is that U.S. mediation solved this all specifically for escalation convention, because it means that they can bring them to the table. But in the event where where Pakistan literally thinks that India will nuke them, then there's no mediation because they think it's try or die. They have no other choice but to nuke back. And they say the trial evidence doesn't say it literally does. It says that India could nuke them or Pakistan would have a use it or lose it mentality, and then they would nuke them. And they say the focus on defensive tech, but our argument is that these defensive tech, such as like it literally talks about space situational awareness, can also be used offensively. It's dual use. Then they say that there's no like miscock right now, but they say that it's like they have India's doctrine is to do restraint, but our argument is that Pakistan nuking. They say be skeptical of uniquely like, but if we win our argument, we're probably winning that it's probable. On the China argument, I already answered the revision and stuff. They say they have no intention to escalate, but our argument is not about escalating in India, which takes out of all the impact events they read about no Indo-China war. Our argument is that engaging in the Philippines. Then they say that then they say that the peacekeeping stuff is a myth, but they say that China doesn't want to do anything. But prefer our evidence, which is that yeah, China doesn't want to redraw the world map right now because they're already doing well. The only thing that flips is when they're being entrapped in their hedge, which they have right now, is going down. That's the only time they escalate. Then they say we don't have security commitments in the Philippines, but our argument says that the U.S. wants to go in because they want to fight China. They want an excuse to fight China. Go to their case. On the top of their case, first on the first argument about setting standards, there's no uniqueness. China's winning right now, Bloomberg 23. China sought to use the space program as a soft power tool, but while nearly 2 dozen countries have signed for the Artemis Accords, no country is going China Russia via ILRS. The lack of space authoritarianism in every impact scenario also proves the non-unique and the impact scenario is non-unique. China can spread authoritarianism through other avenues other than space, like economic coercion, trade, and arms sales. O'Brien 20. Legal frameworks based on national dominance on multilateral international competition set of centuries of conflict among the major powers as a result of centuries of war. The UN proposed an international agreement known as the OSCE was an intentional effort to avoid the mistakes. The Artemis Accords, a continuation of unilateral dominance over international cooperation. Despite the lessons of history, the US is going full speed ahead with the dominance model space developed rather than cooperation model. This means that we say, if anything, it just makes China even more like lashing out. Then on democracy, there's no democracy impact milestone 18. Results are consistent across all tests. There's no credible evidence supporting democracy. The cause is deep. The impact is zero, regardless of how interstate conflicts measure. Cut the card there. They haven't heard any evidence that actually cites any analysis of what toxins being bad for this. On the moon. First, there's a couple of analytics. Their only offense comparatively is that there's a couple years delayed. That's their own evidence that says it's going to get delayed at the end of the decade instead of 2024. And your evidence is all about lunar landings, but all your solvency is about lunar bases. There's no evidence that they can make lunar bases. On helium 3 specifically, it's being discovered on Earth and taking away the incentive to go lunar Pharaoh 22. Helium 3 is potentially 10 times more common on Earth than previously known. Scientists have captured evidence for a previously unknown abundance of helium 3 in the atmosphere, which motivates a search for missing helium 3 sources on Earth. There's the source of helium 3 on our planet. Skip the next card. On quad debris. First, there's always a political incentive. Your impact is true because countries always want to be able to use space. Second, U.S. debris efforts are misguided. Previously, Artemis standards have no solvency. Urban 23. The United States is not doing as much as other nations to solve the problem of orbital debris. In nations that are not nearly enough to address the threat, U.S. is woefully behind the rest of the world in this area. The U.S. is tackling debris as a problem that's decades away, and debris collisions are increasing rapidly. Second, debris removal doesn't work. David 21. Space rocket removal is not going smoothly. Removing large rocket bodies is significantly different tasks than removing the equivalent massive and lost more obvious space systems, dramatically lowering launch costs, opening the floodgates for more satellites to reach lower orbits. And there's debris cooperation with the status quo, leading on to 22. India is part of the IADC leading authority on debris, and NASA is part of the committee, which also includes Russia and China. I'll skip the analytic. And there's no debris cascades, even in worst case, it confined to low LEO with no impact range 17. Kessler syndrome is over height. Let's imagine a worst case scenario. Evil alien shoots of everything, spreads evenly. If a rocket travels through all of that, is also hitting that cube retarding less than 1, and without even the worst case, we lose access to space. Thus be urgent, I got.
Okay. Why does the US want to go to war with China?
Because we say that it's like a chance to like fight back against like their growing power.
What evidence says that they want to go to war with China?
It's like it's like how did let me see which one it is. It's the Zoe evidence. It says if there's a maritime clash with Vietnam, Malaysia, or the Philippines, the U.S. will have an excuse to step in, and that could trigger direct.
So an excuse to step in from the associate researcher of the National Institute for South China Sea Studies. Like, why does that mean that the U.S. wants to go to war? Like, it's saying they have an excuse to step in, but like having an excuse to do something isn't the same thing as having the will to do something. Why would they step in?
I mean, yeah. So
wait, why can't they just like start a war in Taiwan right now?
Because obviously, like it's probably like, unpopular, right, for the U.S. to get like start a war in Taiwan.
I'd agree, war is unpopular.
I mean, but we would say like do you think if China invades Taiwan, would the U.S. like just like automatically just, like give them up? Obviously not, right? When the U.S. sees its allies are getting invaded, it's like pretty popular to like defend our allies. Like a bunch of people think that we should do that. B, we said specifically the United States, we both agree that the United States and China are both sort of fighting for hegemony. So we say that in the event where the U.S. like has like an excuse to do it, they probably will fight for this. Like we both agree that like both countries like want hegemony. Like, can I have a question?
Sure.
Okay, let's talk about the. I guess let's talk about Indo-Pac.
Mm-hmm.
So how does like how how does it matter that like they're like buying weapons from Russia or something?
It not makes the argument that it's inevitably going to cause escalation, or it just won't.
Wait, but what says that like buying like air missiles from Russia to solve?
Same logic. The ability for them to shoot down and prevent Pakistan from attacking them creates escalatory.
But like, did you read any evidence that says that lets them do that?
Not necessarily. I think it.
Like,
I
I know you really did. You looked at
I
the case we read last round.
I think your evidence like says that, like your link evidence like pretty explicitly says that a threat to Pakistan doesn't necessarily have to be specific satellites or reconnaissance.
How is air defense missiles a threat
because
to Pakistan?
India has the ability to shoot Pakistani missiles in the event of a scenario.
Yeah, but our argument, like, how does that? Our argument is that Pakistan thinks that India can attack them. And then your argument is
that's not what you're. Like, yeah. It says that India can attack them, but they already have the abilities to attack them. The evidence just says that they would have an ability to monitor Pakistan. So it's not like their ability to attack them changes whatsoever. What? So BMDs provide the same monitoring capability.
BMDs provide monitoring?
Yes, like you can monitor missiles. Can I have a question?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay. With regards to India, Pakistan, so actually let's talk about China.
Okay, sure.
Why is India a tipping point for China?
Why is India? Because like per your own case evidence, India is like a really large thing that signals a lot of credibility to the Artemis Accords.
Okay, and so do the Artemis Accords threaten China?
Yeah.
What evidence is that?
The first part we read.
Okay.
Start on our case weighing their case. Start an argument about the Quad. India hasn't signed the Artemis Accords and as such can't participate in Quad debris mitigation efforts and remediation through removal. Current ad hoc processes are failing because they're too they're not cohesive. However, if India signs on the Artemis Accords, they can work with the Quad to provide a model for the rest of the world. This is important because without mitigation and removal, debris will cascade, which harms space exploration because it'll hit satellites and take them out. This is bad because exploration is critical to lateral innovation, which is crucial to getting us to space exploration to get us off the rock. So first, they said there's always a political incentive. However, this is through bilateral stuff and ad hoc processes. We said they need to participate with the Quad, and the only way to do that is by signing the Artemis Accords. They said that the U.S. efforts are misguided. However, that's not talking about the Quad. Our argument says that the Quad can specifically do it, and even if the U.S. is not doing it alone, they can do it through the Quad, which we argue they would if you sign the Artemis Accords. Then they say the removal doesn't work and it's harder. First, we can still mitigate debris by regulating future launches, so we can still solve for the impact. Second, that's the reason it's failing now is because ad hoc processing is hung back by political will that signing the Artemis Accords would solve. Then they say there's cooperation now, but this is not through the Quad. It's through some just like UN basic thing that clearly isn't succeeding. The only way to succeed is through the Quad. This links into ad hoc processes are failing. Then, unlike the impact defense, it deters exploration. It doesn't have to actually take out any satellite where we physically cannot launch a rocket. Just it existing, it deters future exploration, it deters investment, which means it reduces the innovation and we won't get off the rock. We outweigh first, they've dropped its try or die to get off the rock. Extinction will happen for some reason on Earth, so the best thing you can do is become an interplanetary species to mitigate that risk. Second, we link in because if we have a collaboration on innovation and we're also increasing tech, we'll decrease the likelihood of conflict by preventing things like climate change and also by sharing and negotiations between countries. When they're in more communication, you'll have less war. Then, if India is focusing on debris removal tech and things like that, they're not going to be focusing on tech that'll provoke Pakistan. And then last, reject time frame as a weighing mechanism. You should prefer probability because nobody cares if dinosaurs died 65 million years ago or 65 million 10 years ago. You should prefer probability, and we're by far the most probable. Then onto their case. First, they have a uniqueness error. On our first contention, they said China's losing now, so that should take out their C3 because China will always be behind. But first, so yeah. They said that they've dropped that China's fine with the Accords. Legal experts agree they're not going to retaliate. They think it's fine. It already exists now. This takes up there's no hedge war. Then they say they've dropped China's revisionist. And this is a turn because if China's revisionist, the only chance of solvency is to vote for the Aff so that we can have regulation and actually fight back against them. They say that their evidence accounts for multiple years. This doesn't account for the unique aspects of space and ASAP escalation that China's doing now. Then on their second contention, they dropped the uniqueness. It says that war is very, very likely now. So the uniqueness flows to our side because we should be trying to do something because war is very likely. They dropped the turn that says the U.S. would get leverage through communications. And when the U.S. gets this leverage and we're sharing info with these countries, the U.S. can intervene. They say the U.S. has intervened in the past. However, the U.S. has never intervened in the past. We should do it now because the only way to do that is through the Artemis Accords. Then they drop articles every year that say there's a high likelihood of war, so you should be skeptical. The doctrine is peace in the area, so there's very little likelihood of war. On their last contention, first, they've dropped it that preserves the balance of power. That's a turn to their case because by signing the Artemis Accords, we preserve the balance of power, so there's no war. Then they've also dropped it the Artemis Accords already existed and China's not mad, so that should take out their argument. They give no reason, it doesn't even mention India in the argument. Since the Artemis Accords exist and China hasn't lashed out at a war, the argument's very skeptical and extremely low probability. You don't know what exactly makes China mad.
It's going to be our case winning their case. on China is revisionist. Our evidence is much better. Their evidence doesn't even say China is revisionist. It just says that China is doing things that they don't say they're doing, which is not mentioned the word revision one time. Our evidence says that China doesn't escalate conflicts or cause conflicts unless they're specifically threatened, and they've dropped that this is an empirical study of the past. Their evidence doesn't talk about revision. It's much better, which means that they don't access any turns on the C2, and the balance of power stuff was not explained in the summary, and it doesn't make sense as to any type of link turn or option that they get. We're going for the C1 on but we're going for the link one on Pakistan. Let's assume the link. Right now, India does not have this type of surveillance capabilities that threaten Pakistan, but affirming that they do interoperability with the United States, and they're able to expand their budget, that they do these types of surveillance capabilities that take away Pakistan's second strike capabilities and give India the capabilities to see where every single Pakistani nuke is in their country, which specifically raises tensions in Pakistan because they think that India can do a first strike that takes away every single Pakistani nuke, and Pakistan won't have second strike capabilities, which is why Pakistan will launch a first strike. They consider that the first strike leads to escalation and causes nuclear war, which leads to extinction. They've read two responses. First, the response that war is likely right now is contradicted by two other responses in the rebuttal and the summary. A, the evidence that says that the United States can mediate the conflict means that the conventional wars will never spill over to nuclear wars, only first strikes will. And B, all of the evidence that they say the uniqueness is wrong and how there's in tens of articles about how war is likely now directly responds to the evidence that says that war is likely right now, but does not respond to the link about first strikes, because we're talking about Pakistan being escalated by a future policy, not that war is just specifically likely now. That is their own uniqueness that is contradicted by all of the tons of empirics about people saying that war is likely now. And they say that the doctrine is peace, but they've not responded adequately to the fact that the surveillance capabilities mean that India can take down every single Pakistani nuke. Look, the warning is really clear that Pakistan thinks that India has the capabilities to use their surveillance capabilities to launch down every single Pakistani nuke and completely deter them from ever starting a conflict or having second strike capabilities, and that is all conceded evidence as to why Pakistan will have to launch a first strike, and it's try or die for them, which means that it's definitely good on probability weighing. Let's go to their case. We're going to be going for a couple of arguments. First, that there are always going to be efforts to be, there's always going to be an incentive to go to space, so there are always going to be efforts for why we will go to space. The frontline was just that the quad can do it better, but they have not read any adequate warning as to why the quad can do it better, or why the quad won't do it without India. We said that because there are incentives to go to space, there will always be reasons as to why we will be investing in space, either absent the quad or with the quad. It doesn't give any reasons to why the quad is specifically key to that. And we're going for the evidence that debris cascades debris cascades don't happen, and even in the worst case scenario, we don't get access cut off to space. The only frontline was that it's like try or die, that we won't want to go to space. But no, the reason why we couldn't be able to go to space is we're able to detect the fact that the debris would take out our satellites. The United States has pretty good debris detection capabilities, so if we know the fact that we are not cut off to space, we will still continue with space exploration. The actual warranty of the card that we can go to space, and even if there's a ton of debris and that doesn't cut off our access to space, means that they're contentious, terminally never going to happen. Oh, and they've also conceded evidence that the United States, or that India is already doing cooperation with the IADC. Is straight dropped that India is doing stuff to stop debris removal, and they've dropped the fact that debris removal can't happen in the future. They just said that the quad could be able to do. The evidence is clear that they can't.
If the UN, every major spacefaring country is collaborating through the IADC, why do we need the quad specifically?
They're ad hoc. We've read specific evidence saying that.
Mean?
Why is the quad ad hoc? What does that mean?
The quad is 4 countries: U.S., Australia, India, Japan, that have established a framework and set of rules for space that India is not able to abide by because it is not part of the Artemis Accords. There is zero way you can say we are absolutely solving it. What you read in rebuttal was one sentence from this evidence saying India is working with the IADC. That doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, but
Can I finish my answer?
Yeah, sure.
Y'all asked the question. Okay, so that doesn't mean anything given that India is still not working within the quad, which could lead to more effective debris removal and mitigation. And you have read no evidence indicating that cooperation is effective. The best form of cooperation is when India is abiding by norms that all countries agree to. The Artemis Accords are a platform for them to do so. Even if your argument is theoretically true, the way it was read in rebuttal was one line from the card that says India is working with the IADC.
Also, wait. Is there any evidence that says that the quad's efforts would be good or something?
Yeah.
This whole hypothetical.
Yes, it is. It says the quad is uniquely positioned for debris removal and mitigation, and that it would be a signal and set a precedent for the EU and Five Eyes.
Why is the quad better than just every other country?
4 of the biggest spacefaring nations. It's one of the first
4 of the biggest spacefaring nations.
Y'all are asking the questions. Can I please answer them? Okay.
Sure.
Yeah. So there are 4 of the biggest spacefaring nations, including the U.S., India, Japan, Australia, which all have space programs. More than that, their ability and intention in space is different from all the rest because it's a minilateral grouping. It is not that is multilateral and overbearing, but rather countries coming together in specific small groups that allows for better collaboration. These minilateral groupings, our evidence says, can establish a better precedent.
So our Panda evidence from Yates also kind of distinguishes this because it says that current agreements don't actually have a consensus on what to do about debris, but if India participated with the Quad, you would develop a consensus that could be modeled globally. So even if they're in the IADC whatever, there's no consensus and they're not actively doing anything, and that's not warranted in your one line.
That's fine. You can have a question.
Okay. So for first strike, would India want to disable all of Pakistan's nukes?
We say the
Pakistan
Pakistan
thinks they
thinks that
want
they
to.
will. Yeah, that's probably like conceded, right?
Okay, so why would India develop that capability then?
It's not that they developed that capability, right? The way it is that like maybe India doesn't do it with the intention of striking, but the way it works is that like when you have these space technologies, like all these innovations and technologies have multiple purposes, right? Like your own case evidence, right? Or the evidence here in your rebuttal literally says the exact same thing, that they do these development for like situational awareness and stuff like that. So our argument is that when they like develop these sort of satellites or get access to them, that gives them the capability to monitor all Pakistan things, like, and that's what causes the conflict.
Okay.
Also, the conceded Parisha evidence says that they want to get surveillance capabilities on sensitive areas for military perspective.
Yeah, but like they just like literally just like don't have the capabilities to do it.
Like even if they're not wanting to do the military strikes, then
Yeah,
still possible.
that's correct.
Weighing Afghan. If we win a risk of our case, the round ends. They did not weigh in their last speech, and we did. They have dropped that due to a multitude of factors, extinction is largely inevitable on Earth. The best thing we can do is become a multi-planetary species. They also dropped that increased technological cooperation is a short circuit to their case, because India won't focus on the type of satellites that harm Pakistan, but rather on debris removal and mitigation, which means that we take out their case. More than that, it facilitates cooperation, reduces the effects of climate change, which all create existential problems across the globe. None of this was responded to. They're going to say their argument happens first, but they've dropped that time frame doesn't matter, so it's about who best preserves humanity. That is the Aff. Let's look at their responses. They first say we can go to space regardless. Yes, we have an incentive to, but the fact of the matter is that ad hoc processes mean that there isn't effective debris removal and mitigation. Maybe there's an incentive to go to space, but no ability. And they've dropped that private investors are the one deterred from investing in space exploration because there is a risk of debris collisions. They say cascade syndrome and that it doesn't cascade. A, we prevent future debris, which means that our argument is much more probable in the long term. But B, they have dropped it again. It's about the private sector and their ability to invest. Even if we don't lose physical access to space, the possibility of collisions is what deters investments. They say they're working with the IADC, but the unique ability of the Quad is to work within a minilateral grouping as Artemis with the platform, which then allows it to establish rules and governance for space. Right now, India is the only member not part of Artemis that is part of the Quad, and as well, it leads to ad hoc processes and ineffective debris management, which each country does their own thing under big multilateral organizations. Affirming solves as then allows them to signal that, and absent this, we won't see space exploration and no ability to solve extinction through getting off the rock. At that point, the round is largely over. And more than that, like, hold the line on explanations of their defense. They were one sentence in rebuttal and are definitely not criminal. Let's go to their case. The argument I'm going for on Indo-Pak is the mediation solves argument. They have dropped that the only way U.S. can mediate the conflict is if India signs the Artemis Accords. The evidence says it opens up bilateral talks and ties, which means that India or U.S. can de-escalate the situation. Mediation doesn't solve now because they have no incentive. They haven't done so before. But if India signs Artemis, it gives them the opportunity to. That is the House evidence. Whether war is probable or not, the fact that they don't go to nuclear war in the first place and there is no first strikes is turned by the fact that the U.S. gets involved and prevents it from ever happening.
The order will be like, it'll start on my case and I'll goes from there. On Indo-Pak, they just say that they have no incentive to do mediation. The conflict's happening right now. They can see that conflict isn't going to happen right now. Per their own rebuttal evidence, that says that all these arguments are sort of just like fear mongering, and that they always misread the Indo-Pak security dilemma. They've also conceded that the specific thing that's different is the first strike, because the first strike has no room for any sort of mediation that's always happened in the past because it's try or die for Pakistan. It's also the same probability weighing that they read. That's like try or die for other states, which is we definitely link into all the probability weighing that they read. Extend the argument. Our argument is pretty much been conceded at the end of the day. It says that right now India wants these surveillance capabilities, but they don't have the capability to do so. But by joining the Artemis Accords and facilitating things like tech sharing, they gain these capabilities. They can fully conceded that when India has these capabilities, Pakistan thinks that their nukes are under a threat, and instead they just retaliate. That goes global, that goes nuclear, and causes extinction. This has all been conceded. Look. On the weighing debate, they say it short circuits our case, but no, because if our case happens before all of your arguments happen in the first place, it was A, new and final, B, like, obviously if this happens first, then your short circuit can't happen, and C, like, the argument about innovation, we're literally saying that the innovations that come from the Artemis Accords are what cause the escalation. There's no prerequisite if we're on, like, the same link. Go to their case on the moon. Even if you buy their weighing, which like is pretty, it's just this probability. But if we're winning a sufficient risk of linked defense, then you probably should just assign a low probability to their argument. It was super mishandled. The first argument I'm going for is the impact deed. This was pretty much dropped out of summary. It says that right now there's a 1 in 10,000 chance of any collisions, and that all of their predictions are overblown. They just say it's the future, but these are still all the models they're using, and our evidence indicts the models that they're using. Then they say it's about investor confidence, but if investors know that there's a 1 in 10,000 chance, they'll still keep investing. Empirically proven by all the evidence we've read in this round that says that investors are flocking to space, and all the evidence that says that space investment is growing dramatically. Second argument I'm going for is the IADC argument. They just said it wasn't explained well in rebuttal, but if our argument is that right now there's a group of every single major space country in the world that's collaborating on debris, that obviously is the same thing as theirs but on a greater scale. They say mini-lateralism is better, but this is A just mu and final empty. This makes zero sense. Obviously it's better for every single country in the world to collaborate on space than just a small group of people who have different goals than every single other country in the world. It's a really easy neg bout.